about the village finances, back in the summer of 2010, I had proposed that we have the home rule referendum that would have given the village authority to raise revenue in many ways, including by just having the board vote on property tax increases. That was before the electorate at the November 2010 meeting, and it was unsuccessful. Then in 2012, there were two general referendums that was aimed to help the village across the board, and articulated that we needed the money to hire another full-time police officer. We've had that vacancy for a number of years now, to fix streets, and also to help with the debt increase payment that we were going to experience. Having paid off the street bond in 2009, we refinanced a couple of debt certificates, and the first few years it was a lower amount, and then actually last year it jumped up by $100,000. So the first referendum asked for a $350,000 property tax increase to be spread amongst the homeowners in the village. That was unsuccessful. We reduced that and tried again in November of 2012, and we reduced it to $200,000. And I don't think we targeted the police. My memory serves me right that we would hire somebody with that. It costs money. But in any event, to have asked for anything less than that really would not have helped the village. So, why was it $200,000? Well, my thinking at that time was $100,000 for the debt, and then that would give us some breathing room with the rest of our funds, and $100,000 to put into a street program as best as we could. Again, that was unsuccessful. And now here we are in 2014, in March, with a street bond referendum that, if passed, will have the same effect as the last two. It will raise your property taxes. This one is specifically targeted to fixing the streets. We had a town hall meeting in November where we discussed going forward with this. I think the people who were here will recall that predominantly the people in the audience were people who were in favor of it, and of course people who need to get their streets fixed. That's a known fact, and the known fact is that we need the money. So that brings us to next Tuesday's election, and we'll see where it goes. So at this time, a couple things, and I'll bring one point I want to get to later, but right now let's open it to the audience. Any questions you have, any input, any comments with regarding to the street bond referendum that we can answer factually? Meaning not argument why you should or shouldn't vote for it. On this side, Mr. Metz.
Yes, Chris Metz, 6403 Arrowhead Court. What kind of engineering study has been done so far for the roads? Is there anything, is it just cursory? Is it detailed? What would a detailed study cost? Because from my understanding, we really don't know what the real cost of fixing our roads will be. Is that correct?
The last part, we don't really know what will be.
What the real cost of fixing our roads might be.
I think we do. I think that's encompassed in the $2.5 million that we're asking for. But I would call on our village engineer, Dave Vandervelde, to explain the nature of the engineering study that took place to arrive at the estimated cost that we had previously put out for all the streets.
Good evening, everyone. To answer your question, probably cursory is the word that we've used so far. We've driven every street in town, evaluated from engineering experience what we've seen and what we think is necessary. What's left to do is find out in depth what we have out there. For example, the pavement thickness of the asphalt, do an actual inventory of the curb and gutter that has to be replaced, and possibly look at, in this case, winter damage, which it's everywhere. So some of the streets that we thought maybe crack filled or just patched, we might have lost them over this winter. You know, the streets were out of we've lost a few. So, yes, we developed a cost estimate from that. We feel the cost estimate's viable and can be used. But what's left is to go out and really inventory the streets, do some pavement cores, inventory the curb and gutter, see if there's any problems beyond just the street that we can solve the same problem. And that we've discussed, and we're just gonna hold off until we see where we are at with the referendum. Simply because it's involved, costly, and time consuming, and should, for whatever reason, the referendum fail, it would be money that would be gone, because the engineering would be done, but we would have nothing to do with it.
What kind of stuff do you do? Do you take core samples and things like
Yes.
that?
Yes. Cores, we'd review old plans. It's got a pretty complete set of the infrastructure in town as far as what was built even 25, 30 years ago. We look at that and see if any problems have developed from what was built that we can correct, like I said. And again, cores, some streets, they may have 4 inches of asphalt and it's solid at the bottom, and we could just take 2 inches off, put 2 inches back. Other ones that are listed on the high priority list, they're pretty well gone. They've got to come out and be rebuilt. But again, that in-depth study is part of the actual design process that we would not have started yet.
If the referendum doesn't pass, why would that information be wasted if it was done ahead of time?
Well, if you have no money to implement the improvement, you'd have the study, you'd have the plans to do it. If no money came available, just for instance, say 3 years, the plans would still be there, but it'd have to be reevaluated again for simple wear and tear in the streets and damage that would occur from when we completed our work to when we actually had the funds to do the work.
How much would the study cost?
To implement the bond issue, or
Yes,
to prepare contract plans?
to implement the bond issue.
The
Mr.
problem,
Metz, can I ask, is your question, how much would it cost the village to complete final engineering?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
that we haven't put pen to paper yet, but in a project of this size, the way it's set up where the bad streets are up front, we're looking, correct me if I'm wrong, at the entire, the $2.5 million issue to go through. There's not an option on the ballot for
No, it's
1, 2,
the
3.
It's the full scenario house
It would-
plan.
Normally, IDOT, what should I say, structured percentages, and that's the way we work to start with, until we get a real hard scope of work. We're probably looking at between 5 and 10% of the total cost of the improvement. Some of the stuff is difficult, time consuming to design, and then to actually build it, we've got people out there also. Some of the stuff, the crack filling, et cetera, is not labor intensive, it's very easy to do. It doesn't require somebody standing over the contractor all the time, but once we start physically working on the streets, that's where the costs are entailed. So to answer your question, probably, right now, I'm guesstimating 5 to 10% worst case, and I doubt if it would be 10%.
There was a hand up on this side of the room. Thanks, Dave. Anybody?
Good evening. Patrick Ferguson, 48 Elmwood Court. This evening, I'd actually like to present to the board 3 pictures that I took Tuesday of a sewer at the end of my driveway. The area around the sewer is actually collapsing and crumbling. In the pictures, you will see some leaves and twigs. Unfortunately, I was not able to bend over to remove them. I have a back injury. Picture 2 shows the deepest point of this crack at being 8 inches deep. And picture 3 shows the crumbling area being approximately 24 inches wide. And obviously I am for repairing and upkeeping our streets.
And Mr. Ferguson, just for the record, you and I briefly spoke about your issue before the meeting, correct?
Correct, you introduced yourself to me.
Could I ask you, the gentleman just immediately to your right is our Public Works Superintendent? And if you could present, Ed, could you take a look at that?
Yeah, we'll take care of it.
Short of the street part, but at least take a look at that sewer, and we'll get back.
Just an additional comment, the sewer is in my driveway, at the end of my driveway. I'm actually getting afraid to pull in and out of my driveway for fear that it's gonna collapse.
We'll check it tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other questions now in general on the street bond referendum? In the front, your name and address, please.
Vern Kramer, 11135 Glenbrook Lane, that's an Asheville.
Go ahead, sir.
What happens if the referendum fails? My sense is that we have not worked hard enough to promote the absolute need for this, or pointed out consequences of not getting a yea vote.
Okay, that's a very good question. We need to go to an alternate plan. And, you know, I wanted to ask the residents here tonight, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the village as well. What would they do if this fails? I think it's been well established now, and by the way, I wanted to point out that Trustee Wittenberg, Trustee Bailey, and Public Works Superintendent Ed Santon, along with Dave Vanderveld, looked at this matter that came up with the report that we did distribute back on November 7th at the Townhall meeting, and has been recently written in the 2 issues of smoke signals. So it was a cooperative effort on the part of the staff to come up with the numbers that are here. And the feeling was to go with the broader plan, $2.5 million. I think 2 things have been, as I think I heard you say, established, is we need to do it and we need the money to do it. And I personally am very much in favor of addressing this issue now and not letting it lapse, irrespective of the outcome of the bond issue next time. Although I'm hoping that the election, say, assume with me for a moment that it's favorable, then we'll have the money and we'll go and try to get the best deal in the bond market to borrow the money, whether it's 10, 15, or 20 years, although we previously talked about having it for 15 years. And if it becomes, if it's unsuccessful, then we won't have those funds. And so I would, you know, I'm looking for input on what would we do for Plan B. Trustee Hinshaw, you've asked several times, what's our Plan B? What would you do as an alternate plan to fix the roads in the event that the bond referendum failed?
Thank you, Village President. We have talked about that several times, and I guess one thing I would do would be to look at cutting things like the liquor commissioner, $3,000.
We've done that already. We've done. Same with the salaries, done. What else?
I think there are other cuts in the budget that we can do. I don't think there's enough in the budget to do that, so then we have talked about other things to raise money.
Okay. We have a finance committee now that has 2 of our outstanding residents from the village helping trustees O'Loughlin and Schnaufer and Dave Brink and our new village administrator to identify those cuts and places where we can save money. I agree with you in terms of irrespective of what we cut, that it's still not gonna be enough money to go forward. So there has to be a way to raise revenue. Do you have any suggestion on the revenue side?
I do not.
Okay. I have a suggestion, and I'll just put it out there. I want to know, I'd like to hear from you folks. Don't throw the tomatoes just yet, but I would like to know your feeling if the referendum doesn't fail. One thing we can do that we would not need to put on a ballot and vote on is raise vehicle stickers. And that could generate additional money. For example, and I'm not telling you I want to do this, so please, if you're telling your neighbors about what I said, I'm using this as a hypothetical and I'm open to input. But I think last month trustee Hinshaw gave us a report that we were, last year I think we sold 3,017 vehicle stickers. And this year it looks like it'll be, for 2014, it'll be 3,060. I'll round it off because it's easier for me to do the math, but if we raise the vehicle stickers from $50 to $100, a $50 increase, that would generate another $150,000. I've looked into this a little bit. The village can take a loan. The board can vote on it, we can obtain a loan as long as we pay that loan off in 10 years. And so my thought would be at $150,000 a year additional income from the vehicle stickers, we could afford in 10 years to pay back $1.5 million. Well, if you factor in the interest, that will only be enough money to cover what has been referred to as the scenario 1, the 9 streets that are in the really worst condition, entitled Triage Urgent Need of Repair. And so I'll just read them off so we know where we're talking. Arrowhead Trail, Deercrest Lane, Cascade Drive, Glenbrook Lane, Ashbrook Lane, Pembroke Drive, Edgebrook Lane, Keokuk Road, Buttonwood Court. Estimated engineering, estimating cost without the final engineering is $1.3 million. Put in a little extra for the engineering and interest over 10 years. $150,000 extra income from vehicle stickers based on selling 3,000, and we could do that. But we're only going to do those streets. And to the extent other streets and areas needed attention, we'd have to carve that out of the general fund. So that's a possible, and there are probably several, that's a possible suggestion I have to raise revenue. Maybe raise the vehicle stickers. Well, that's good for you folks. The thing about vehicle stickers is it's not, you can't deduct that on your income tax if you're in a position to take advantage of that, whereas a property tax increase, you can. So you do get maybe some small benefit there. But there was a gentleman in the back here. Can you say your name and your address, please?
Jack Brandish, 1 Cascade Drive. Just to say that I am in favor for the road referendum. I have been looking more closely at my real estate tax bill. And again, I think, as you have pointed out, the village only gets 8.28% of our total real estate tax bill. But what concerns me, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm looking at it wrong, there's an item in here that says pension. And there's a figure here that says, when I look at how much pension is paid and what the total tax for the village is, 23.55% of what I pay to the village is paid to pension. Now, am I missing something, or is that true? That seems a lot.
Without seeing your document, I don't know, and I can't comment. I'm not, I think
I'm
if I
just looking at my
recall,
real estate tax bill, I did the calculations. Again, it's 8.28% of the total of what I pay. But what I paid, whatever's paid to the village, of that amount, there's a column in here that says pension, 23.55% of what I paid to the village is for pension. What can we do to reduce the amount of pension so you do get more revenue? That's my,
Well, then,
can you look at that?
yes. What, you had, what figure, 28?
23.55%.
Of the 8%.
Of the 8%. Of the 8.28%, 23.55% goes for pension.
I can't speak to it because I'm not 100% sure. Was that the page that came with your recent, the first installment of the tax bill?
Pardon me? I have it right here.
Could you bring it up? Just, I'm not gonna keep it, I just want to see if I can identify the.
Pensions for them,
Okay, here's what we paid to the village. Here's pensions too. Schools and all that.
Now I understand, get my tax bill too, look at it, and, you're at 1 Cascade Drive, sir?
Yes.
Okay, see if we can get an answer for you. But certainly, you know, all costs are from the, you know, from the taxes there, something that can be looked at, or anybody else? Gentleman in the back first.
High school is 2.8.
Way in
George
the back.
Maturk on Hiawatha Street.
I'm sorry, I
Why
missed
can't
your
you
name,
just
sir.
do
I missed your name, sir.
Maturk? Why can't you do one road each year? Why do you have to do a bunch of them and raise the amount of revenue? Like Ashbrook, do Ashbrook one year, do something else next year. Do you have to do the whole town?
That certainly is an opportunity, or an alternative opportunity to do something. The problem is that we have a number of streets that are in really bad shape, that to do the basic ones, which is the 9 streets I mentioned, is gonna cost about $1.3 million to $1.5 million to fix. And we need to, you know, generate $150,000. We can certainly say, okay, let's put if we borrow the money to do that many streets, we need $150,000 to pay it off in the 10 years, and then we know we would have those done, but we can't do anything else. In the meantime, the other streets deteriorate. If we take just half of those streets of the top 9 and get those done this time, yeah, we can borrow less money, and we still need to generate some revenue, so a combination of cuts and maybe not so significant a step up in the vehicle stickers.
Well, excuse me, instead of $100, make it $75 for a vehicle tax.
That certainly is a possibility. But again, I personally haven't analyzed it to push the numbers on, seeing, okay, if we increased it $25, maybe we can save, you know, something that would be equivalent to an additional $25 out of the budget to give us that $150,000. But maybe we can work something like that. That's possible. It's a good suggestion. In the front here, Mr. Kramer, I think.
Art Kramer, I'm not satisfied with the discussion that we are only a few days away from election. And we have no assurance whatsoever that this is gonna go through. I don't see enough action, an appeal or something that encourages our citizens to go out there and vote for this. We talk about vehicle stickers, all these other things, your small amounts of money. We need some serious money now, not for the next election. Our streets are in desperate need of repair. And what are we doing about it with just a few days left to go?
Okay, Mr. Kramer, one of the constraints that we have as a village government is that the law prohibits us from spending village resources to advocate for or against a referendum. That means we can't spend money to print a smoke signals newsletter that we then mail to the residents that says, here's why we think you should vote for this. Believe me, I think everybody up here would love if we could do that. But we can't. All we can do is factual information, which is why what we have in the smoke signals is all we can do. It's up to you folks to talk to your neighbors. I know Trustee Wittenberg has mentioned she's been talking to people. I know I have been talking to people. We've gone to the Acacia Association, talked to them. I've communicated with the president from the Townhall Association in Ashbrook, and to the topic was that they were gonna be putting out a newsletter, and I assumed they were advocating for it. That area leads the streets. So I appreciate what you're saying, and hope you appreciate the constraint that we have to work with and not spending tax money to advocate for it. I'm sure there are people in this town who live in areas who would say, I'm not gonna benefit by this, and therefore I'm not going to vote for it. And that's their right to do as residents of this village. There was another hand up in the back here. Back in the back, sir.
Lou Meany, 6501 Pontiac. I guess, you know, I'm like a lot of people in favor of the referendum, and streets need to be fixed, and however it gets paid for, the residents are gonna have to somehow pay for it, you know, whether it's through stickers or the referendum. But I guess the question I have is there any way, or anybody who can estimate the value of good infrastructure and good streets versus what we have now with respect to property values? I mean, I think property values in this community, I'm concerned about them. I think there's a lot of things that affect them, not just the streets, but I gotta believe that the infrastructure like this has some significant effect on property values, and people look to sell homes or to keep the value of their home. Is there any way to kind of estimate that or assess that? Because that might resonate more with people who maybe don't live on a street that needs to be fixed. And I think that's one of the challenges we have with, you know, the vote, is that a lot of people, you know, live in places where, you know, having a street in front of their house that's in disrepair isn't as big of an issue to them. But if they can maybe see it in the context of value to the overall community, including their property, it might resonate a bit more. And I don't know, that's maybe a very hard thing to estimate or do, but have we ever looked into trying to assess that? Because the streets are really in bad shape. I mean,
To have it, you raise a good point, sir. I would like to know that myself. We haven't looked into hiring an expert to conduct such an analysis for us. There might be articles out there, perhaps the local realtors that we have who live in town could shed some light on that, although we understand we have an election coming up on Tuesday, so we're kind of late, but just, you know, just my intuition is that obviously if you have $1 million house on a street with nice curbs, gutters, and asphalt and pavement in front of your house, and somebody else has one just equally good in an area where things are falling apart, after they see the house with the realtor and they walk out and say, you know what, I like both houses, but the one with the bad streets, you know, it's worth $1 million, but not in that neighborhood. And that's just my intuition, but you raise a good point. Hopefully, other people would see it, I think, the way you and I probably would. I thought I saw a hand up on this side.
Past your neighbor's house to your house.
Mr. Ferguson, please.
I'm just wondering if it would have been possible for the village to apply for any type of federal funds or state funds for this?
Mr. Ferguson, in the past, we have, when they're available to us, most recently in 2009, we paid Blackhawk, which is one of our longer streets, and we were able to, with the assistance of